Eswatini Communications Commission. We are committed to reporting news that is accurate, comment that is fair, and programming that does not amount to hate speech or the description of gratuitous violence or explicit sex. For any complaints of our programming, please contact us on 2411-9600 or email info@eswatinitv.co.sz. You can also contact the Eswatini Communications Commission on 2406-7000 or write a letter to ECCOM on PO Box 7811 Mbabane. Email address is info@ecom.org.sz.
Two p.m. Central African time, and this is Market View. Welcome to the conversation. I'm Sifiso Ngumalo, bringing you the latest in business, enterprise, and the policies that are shaping our economic landscape. Today, the business community is making a decisive commitment to the International Labour Organization's campaign to eliminate child labour in Eswatini. We are at Sibanesami Hotel in Eswatini, tracking that development, where key players are charting a path forward. Then a closer look at Eswatini's green business, waste recyclers, organic fertilizer producers, and other sustainability-driven enterprises. They're growing, but challenges around funding and market access persist. What will it take to scale up? That is the big question. We'll move on to our Enterprise Watch segment, where we want to dissect policy shifts on child labor laws. What is changing? What is missing? And whether cultural participation factors into Eswatini's 8% child labor rate. And rounding it all off, Sanel Lesbia joins us in studio today to break down today's market indices with his sharp, data-driven analysis. Stay with us here on Market View this afternoon. A very good afternoon to you once again. Thank you for joining us. Let's kickstart the show by looking at the business news today. Kicking things off, the business community has pledged to fully support the International Labour Organization in the elimination of child labor in the Kingdom of Eswatini. The Chief Executive Officer, Inati Dlamini of Business Eswatini, said this during the knowledge sharing and capacity building workshop on the development of national action plans for the elimination of child labor by the International Labour Organization. It was held at Sibanesami Hotel at Eswatini, and the Ministry of Labour states that child labor in the country currently stands at 8%.
When you talk about 90% of the private sector under BE, 90% contribution to the GDP of this country, who have also taken keen interest, believe it or not, in the issues of child labor. Because if there are any people who are most likely to breach that, it would invariably be either somebody who's an employer or running a mom and pop business. somewhere in the village. So that this conversation is very, very important to us. But I would like also to highlight the critical importance or position a child holds within our cultural context. Children in our culture are precious little ones.
Futile Dlamini, first Deputy President of Tukoswa, says the country has ratified ILO laws to combat child labor, but more vigorous efforts should be made as child labor is still on the rise.
It shouldn't stop with a rectification. The country has to ensure that child labor is combated fully, because in as much as we have it on paper, we also have to ensure that there is no child labor in Eswatini. Because right now, I'm a teacher by profession, and what we experience in the schools is very disheartening. We have the free primary education where every child is supposed to be attending school. But unfortunately, most children are in the mountains doing child labor. I don't know what they call, I don't know how to call it in English, but they call it kunqutha.
Sindile from the International Labour Organization shares some of the findings of their studies on child labor.
The study also revealed that the African continent was home to the majority of the world's 160 million working children, and that sub-Saharan Africa is a region where child labor is most prevalent, and the region where progress has been slowest and also the least consistent. The SADC, that is your Southern African Development Community area, is not an exception to the increasing child labor problem. We can also just take note of the fact that more than 20 years ago, member states have already taken significant steps to institute policy measures to address child labor. Many, if not all, made significant progress in ratifying all the key international and continental conventions and standards concerning child labor, including Eswatini.
According to the Minister of Labour and Social Security, child labor currently stands at 8% in Eswatini. For Market View, Nelson Dlangamandla for Inkosi Nzinisa, Ezulwini.
Waste recycling is an industry that is growing in the country, and yet some businesses, especially those that produce organic fertilizer, say they still struggle with funding and markets. We spoke to some of these businesses to find out about the business landscape as well as to how they help in preserving the environment.
As the debate continues on whether or not to ban plastic bags, green businesses around the country continue to grow, making a meaningful impact on the environment and providing employment opportunities. Maurice Dlamini of MMD Investments, who hires 7 people in his business, explains how the business works.
What is happening here, we've got some reclaimers from landfill, which they are collecting the types of waste which we are recycling here at the site. And what is happening once they've got such a load, what is happening, we go there and pick up for them and bring it here and we scale it. Then from scaling it, then they are able to know that how much they are going to benefit from their waste. And from there, we bale it, and from after baling it, then once we've got a full load, then we send to our big companies. So we're selling to them, and also we're selling to Mozambique. They used to come here and weigh it, then get some cash for it. Then as well as those ladies there, what is happening, once we've scaled their waste, then we are giving them something.
Thulani Mavimbela from Ingcebo Multipurpose Cooperative manufacturing organic fertilizer says there are 8 young people in the cooperative and have been in the business for the past 4 years.
We are dealing with food scraps. We quite know that as according to statistics, Mr. Wisdom has once shared earlier last year that food scraps actually is the third most effective waste that has polluted the environment on its own. Therefore, we are also playing another factor towards curbing or minimizing that as young people, because we actually believe if we recycle food scraps, we are creating organic fertilizer, which is going to also help young farmers in the country of Eswatini and also improve our livelihood, since we are also partly doing organic farming on the other side.
Young people in the green business say although they struggle with finding markets, their hard efforts have paved the way, as some local shops are now buying their organic fertilizer. For Market View, Nelson Langamandla, for Minkosi Nzinisa, Matapa.
You have been kind to stay with us. Our business news segment ends here, but the show doesn't. It continues after the break.
Eswatini TV has signed a code of conduct that is enforced by the Eswatini Communications Commission. We are committed to reporting news that is accurate, comment that is fair, and programming that does not amount to hate speech or the description of gratuitous violence or explicit sex. For any complaints of our programming, please contact us on 2411-9600 or email info@eswatinitv.co.za. You can also contact the Eswatini Communications Commission on 2406-7000 or write a letter to ECCOM on PO Box 7811 Mbabane. Email address is info@ecom.org.sz.
This is our Enterprise Watch segment. Thank you for staying with us. The International Labour Organization is currently conducting a workshop at Sibanesami Hotel, where they are sharing knowledge and doing capacity building on the development of national action plans for the elimination of child labour. The business community, labour organizations, as well as different stakeholders are taking part. Now, the Principal Secretary in the Ministry of Labour and Social Security, Makosini Mdawe, shared that Eswatini has already strengthened laws and policies to prevent child labour.
In a meeting of SADC ministers and social partners that was held on the 28th to the 30th of March 2022 in Lilongwe, Malawi, ministers and social partners approved the revised SADC Code of Conduct on Child Labour. When adopting this code, ministers and social partners were driven by their commitment to eliminate child labour in line with international labour standards, in particular the International Labour Convention number 138 on minimum age and the ILO Convention number 182 on the worst forms of child labor, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, and the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, which have been ratified by all SADC member countries. The Kingdom of Eswatini ratified both ILO Convention number 138 on the minimum age, as well as Convention number 182 on worst forms of child labor, respectively. Both these conventions fall within the bracket of ILO Fundamental Conventions, which signifies their importance within the ILO body of international labor standards. Moreover, part of the driving force was the African Union's 10-year action plan to eradicate child labor, forced labor, human trafficking, and modern slavery of 2020 to 2030, adopted during the AU summit held in February 2020. It was on the strength of these regional, continental, and international instruments that the SADC member states adopted the revised Code of Conduct on Child Labor to accelerate action to eradicate child labor in the region. In March 2023, the SADC ministers and social partners noted the low status of development on national action plans to eliminate the worst forms of child labor and urge member countries to review and update them accordingly. In May 2022, the Republic of South Africa hosted the 5th Global Conference on the Elimination of Child Labor. The conference came a year following the release of an ILO and UNICEF publication in 2021, revealing the rising prevalence of child labor worldwide and the considerable threat posed by the COVID-19 pandemic on years of progress in addressing issues of child labor. This conference culminated in the adoption of the so-called Durban Call of Action, which is part of the program for this workshop today and the other days that will follow. At the 2024 annual meeting of SADC ministers responsible for labor and employment and social partners held in Lubango in Angola, the meeting number 1 urged member states to implement the SADC Code of Conduct on child labor through dedicated national action plans. Number 2 requested the ILO and other international cooperating partners to support member states in expediting the development and implementation of national action plans, including through gap analysis for the ratification of relevant conventions. And in number 3, urge member states to increase budgetary allocations for child labor and data collection. It is pleasantly notable that as at the time when the SADC member states adopted the revised Code of Conduct on child labor, the Kingdom of Eswatini had already adopted an action program on combating child labor for 2021 through to 2026. Through legal notice number 312 of 2022, government approved and gazetted the appointment of the members of the task force for combating child labor, which is chaired by the Ministry's Principal Secretary, that's myself. Now, good people, due to the numerous changes that have occurred within the ministry, Ministry's Principal Secretaries in the past few years, it has not been possible to ensure that this task force is active and vibrant in executing its desired mandate, that of driving the implementation of the action program on combating child labor in the country. We are very happy for the next 3 days, beginning today. Members of the task force are retreating here in the hotel for knowledge sharing and capacity building on the development of a national action plan for the elimination of child labor, a crucial session that shall be facilitated by the International Labour Organization. The main objectives of this workshop are as follows. Number 1, to enhance the capacity to develop national action plans for the elimination of child labor, including its worst forms. This will entail sensitization on the provisions of child labor conventions ratified by Eswatini, as well as comments made by the ILO standard supervisory bodies on implementation gaps of these conventions. And number 2, to enhance the capacity to develop or review national action plans within the framework of SADC Code of Conduct and the Durban Call of Action, as well as in response to issues raised by the ILO supervisory bodies. And number 3, to develop a roadmap for the finalization and adoption of the National Action Plan for the elimination of child labor. Most interestingly, Program Director, pursuant to this workshop, output 3.3 of the Eswatini Decent Work Country Program of 2022 to 2025 shall be accomplished. This output, which is part of those outputs under the strategic outcome number 3 on accountable governance, justice, and human rights, desires that the tripartite partners should have an improved understanding of their reporting obligations and the quality of reporting required, and should take decisive action to address the comments of the ILO supervisory bodies, including those pertaining to Convention number 138 and 182. Program Director, child labor remains a significant challenge that undermines the rights, dignity, and the potential of countless children across the globe. These young souls should not be subjected to exploitation and hardship. It is our collective responsibility to protect them and to create an environment where every child can thrive and grow. And today's workshop is a crucial step in that direction. It is an opportunity for us to come together, share knowledge, and develop comprehensive strategies to combat child labor. I therefore call upon all stakeholders and partners to play their part in ensuring the smooth and effectiveness of this workshop for our collective good as a nation. Let us engage in thoughtful discussions, exchange best practices, and identify innovative solutions to tackle the root cause of child labor. Remembering that our fight against child labor is not just about addressing the symptoms, but about fostering a culture of respect, equality, opportunity for all children. It requires a holistic approach that involves education, community engagement, and sustainable development. By empowering families and communities, we can create a strong foundation for a lasting solution.
And this story continues with some sectors saying children who participate in cultural events are engaging in child labor. The Ministry of Labour and Social Security, Makhosini Mdawe's PS, says they will be sensitizing different stakeholders to ensure that they understand that this is far from the truth. He says children's participation in cultural events does not account for the 8% child labour in the Kingdom of Eswatini.
Ikhona i-child labor eSwatini ngesikubalekele lokho. Kodwa na lokho sokotisako malama statistics e-child labor are very, very low. Child labor in 8% eSwatini. But asijatshuliswa lokho sima sinayo 8%. Sifiso sethu sima si-eradicate yonke i-child labor ibe ngu-0. And lokho besidakwenza vele sibambisene na-Ministry of Education, sibambisene nawo onke lama stakeholders nabo baqashi, sibambisene nabaka DPM, sibambisene ne-office la Prime Minister nanalo. And I'm sure lokho sima-attain lo 0 uma sibambisene njengoba sibambisana, sihlale sibambisana. Umuntu wokuthi lisiko lethu or amasiko ethu ayi-form of child labor. Besifisile nje ukuphendula clarify ngokuthi akusinjalo. Sifuna kuyisusa leyo ngcondo leyo ngalo mhlangano lesinawo ngokuthi emasiko abonakale sengathi owavakale sengathi seyayi-form of child labor. Le nkulumo le ichamuka ebantwini labanga-understand ukuthi kwenzekani la kula masiko. Bantwana baya emhlangeni voluntarily kude lobafostela. Bantwana bafana baya kuyawukhetha lusekwane voluntarily kude lobafostela. So lokunye lesifisa kukwenda sifuna uku-achieve ngalo lesikwenako ngalo mhlangano wethu ngiloko ukuthi le notion yokuthi lisiko li-associated ne-child labor sifuna nje ukuthi kusuke ngoba we want to educate people as well as part of lo mhlangano wethu, particularly ema-social partners ethu nanawo atawu-understanda ukuthi kanjani ayilo naye ngoba ukhona even atawu-understanda ukuthi yini lesihlale sikhuluma ngayo uma sithi siya emhlangeni siya esekwaneni nalamanye emasiko akhona siyabonga.
And that is how we cap off our Enterprise Watch segment there with the PS from the Ministry of Social Security, Makhosini Mdawe, speaking on child labor. From that, straight into our market analysis. Thank you for staying with us. A mixed day across the markets. Wall Street struggled with the Nasdaq sliding 1.21%, the S&P 500 down 0.50%, while the Dow barely held in the green. European markets mostly flat, and Asia took a hit, with the Nikkei and the Hang Seng both down over 1%. Now, closer to home, the JSE gained 0.34%, while the ESC All-Share Index remains unchanged. Brent crude edged up, but gold dipped, and the Lilangeni weakened slightly against the dollar and the euro. Stanley Sbia is in studio. He's going to help us unpack all the market movement that we see today. Good afternoon to you and welcome to the show, Sanele. Maybe let's start by looking at the tech stocks. They took a heavy hit in the US. We're seeing Nasdaq down over 1%. What are some of the, what is really driving this sell-off?
So what we're seeing in terms of the tech stocks, Mr. Ngumalo, good afternoon. So what we're seeing there is that entire tariff story that Donald Trump is coming into the markets with. So if you look at the whole story of NVIDIA, there's going to be a tariff or there's going to be a penalty on all chip exports into China. So now that is going to actually kill the market and might actually kill the entire artificial intelligence landscape, because we know NVIDIA was a market leader within that space. And with those tariffs coming into play, then we are most likely going to see that happening. And then also with the issues of, the uncertainty around the interest rate and, that uncertainty which has also come into the market with, the Federal Reserve Bank saying they're all going to start talking about this once there's a bit of more clarity. So the lack of clarity in the markets and then that threat against NVIDIA, and we've seen that tariff issue working on Apple, where Apple has actually pledged to bring back the jobs into the US away from China. So there is a bit of uncertainty within the tech stocks there.
Does it signal some, concerns, broader concerns for the sector?
In a way, depending on how Trump is going to play his policy, right? Because in the backdrop of that, we've heard him earlier on in his campaign trail where he said he is going to make America the artificial intelligence capital of the world, and he is going to ramp up that production of those chips within the US. Because what he wants is for that production to come back into the US. And if you look at what he is pushing to do within Ukraine, that entire issue around the minerals deals to pay for that. So what is going after there is those rare earth minerals that are quite critical in that production process.
Okay, but Asia certainly watching how all those developments continue to unfold, and they want to compete there. But perhaps before we get into Asia, let's look at the European sector today. We are seeing markets barely moving. Would you say this reflects investor caution, ahead of the key economic data?
It doesn't. It shows that investors are a bit cautious, purely because there are a lot of moving elements. There is the Trump factor to consider. There is an issue of export tariffs into the US, and we know the US is the biggest consumer market in the globe, second only after China. But in terms of that consumer spending, that consumerism, no other economy matches the US. You have around 314 million strong consumers there with the purchasing power, not just population, but they have the purchasing power. So everybody wants to penetrate that market. So if there is an issue that might affect those market dynamics in terms of the tariffs, then it does. But what you're looking at as well within Europe is the issue of the Russia and Ukraine, how that conflict is going to get resolved, where Europe is going to be within that space, and where Ukraine is going to be and what it means for Russia overall. So what we are likely going to see in the markets there is within that European landscape, I would say go for those defense stocks, because right now we do expect those to edge up a bit. But when we see more money going into defense, it's definitely has to come from somewhere. So when we see that ramp up in defense spending by the European governments in order to get boots on the ground in Ukraine, that's going to push up the markets.
From European markets being barely moved to, steep declines in Asia, perhaps give us how you chime into, what is really happening there in Asia, and maybe in the interest of time, then go through everything else that we have.
All right. So what we're seeing in Asia basically is that NVIDIA story coming into play, because now that's a chip export into China. China that they really do need for those overall artificial intelligence chips. But one interesting thing about Asia is if you look at the Hang Seng there in Hong Kong, it seems we are back into pre-COVID levels. So the tech sector was actually pushing Hong Kong up right now. So with with that chip export issue there, if it spills over into that territory, then we should expect that market to come back down a bit, right? And then coming into South Africa, what again we're seeing is, the JSE is gaining a bit, after having lost yesterday's trade. That's purely because, there is a bit of optimism and a bit of caution going forward. So we're seeing penduluming between the 87 and 80 and 88. So it's just within that range, showing that whatever you lose the previous day, you make up for the following day, purely because there's a bit of volatility around that budget and also the Trump factors to have to consider within the South African market. But with what gold is doing, so the miners really are doing well. Gold is very close to those all-time high of $3,000 per ounce. So if we move into that, we'll see that gold is actually really edged up into that 2,995 type of region. We do expect that if this uncertainty continues, you will definitely hit the 3,000 mark or get very close to it. And then with Brent crude oil,